Hey, I'm live. I'm thinking we got too much light back there. I don't know. Um, if chat's working, whoever's watching, I didn't do an event or anything, so not many people knew I was gonna be live tonight. Um, anyway, can somebody chime in and chat? I'm the only one in chat right now. And of course, Facebook shadow banning my posts and where I posted the link to this live for tonight. And so I don't even know if anybody's seen it at all whatsoever. But and YouTube's been shadow banning my stuff and not notifying people. Hey Donald, did you get a notification? I'm gonna turn that. Hold on, I'm gonna turn that. That's bugging me. That lamp, like there is such a tight fit over here. I swear. Hey Terry, how are you doing? Let me go. Oh gosh. Turn this off. And wear that. Well, it's still, now it almost looks brighter. Let me see. It's just me and Dipper and the turtles. The turtles. It's not, one of them's asleep in my sunflowers. Donald, you did get a notification. Very good. Very good. Um, so tonight, what we're going to do is back on Boys on the Tracks, like I said. And I went back through. I actually prepped for this yesterday because I wasn't sure if I was going to get to do it last night or tonight. That's a little bit better with the light. Um, and made notes again because y'all know I'm organized. By the way, last time you saw me was last Friday, so you're seeing me in less than a week. So I'm doing so good, y'all, with my timeliness and whatnot. And we're going to start getting to where I do these a little earlier. And again, two a week instead of just one. But and the reason I didn't go ahead and wait till tomorrow night. Hey, midnight. Hey. We are, my dad died in April and he was cremated. We actually last Sunday went to the boat dock in Calico Rock that he got a fishing trips at. And the guy he worked for that owned the dock and the guys he worked with, and we spread some ashes and had prayer and everything. And then this weekend, we're going Saturday morning real early to his deer camp, which is in like Princeton, Camden area. Oh, I'm hot, y'all. Um, Mom's got that heat on, and we're gonna go. Um, thank you, Jackie. I just saw your message. That's sweet. I saw the banner. Anyway, we're going Saturday morning. We're leaving here Mountain View at like 7 a.m. and gonna go spread his ashes with it's modern gun season opening this weekend, and all his deer camp buddies will be there, and they all want to take part in spreading some of his ashes at his favorite deer stand. So anyway, so I got to get up at like 5 a.m. on Saturday morning, and because we're leaving at 7, and then driving to Little Rock to meet my sister and her boyfriend, and my best friend and her. What's my door open? And her boyfriend, Monica, my best friend since kindergarten, and because my dad was like her dad, and we're gonna drive. It's like an hour and a half south of North Little Rock, Sherwood, and drive down there and be there at 1 to spread his ashes. But we're all gonna go eat first, and so that's why this weekend is totally out for me to do this. So if I didn't do this by the night, then it was definitely gonna be early next week. And week that I've got my mom taking my Joe tomorrow morning because this one's going to be. Um, I'm going to try to keep it under 3.5 hours. I've got 2 interviews to play, but so this is going to be a late one. So I've got my mom taking my Joe for me tomorrow, so in the morning, so I can stay on as long as possible if I need to. And thanks, hugs, and prayers. Hello, Shelly. Hope all is well. Thank you, Shirley Spears. Everything's good. I'm doing really well. But anyway, so that's why you're seeing me tonight. But I do want to start doing. Sorry, y'all. My nose has been itching like crazy today. Uh, this weather change has got me. I've been sneezing and stuff. My eyes have been puffy. Um, But anyway, I want to start doing like one during the week, and possibly even I want to do it when I hit the most crowd, when people are can do it. But I feel like in the evenings after 6 o'clock p.m., whether it's weekend or weekday, is the best because people work and stuff like that. So because it's better to do these when I have the most, and I'm still trying to figure that out exactly when the peak time is. And I have the YouTube Studio app, and it helps me out and kind of shows me when people watch. There's a lot of people that watch in the mornings, like the replays and stuff. So I don't know. We'll figure it out. I mean, if worst case scenario, everybody can always watch it on replay. Um, Donald's been up since 4 this morning. Don't be surprised if he falls asleep. Yeah, I know. Donald goes, um, Christy can't text and chat. It has no way for her to text. I don't know. Uh, I don't know. I wonder if somehow you got, well, can somebody with a wrench, Terry, or somebody check on, um, Christy, what's your username? See, who's Midnight? Midnight, I get confused on. I was thinking that was Pitt. That's right. She's Pitt. Terry, I don't know if you can check to make sure Pitt isn't Missy. That's right. I get you and Pitt confused for some reason. I know if somehow she got blocked out here or YouTube did it. Most likely YouTube did it, but if not, Pitt will get that fixed for next time because I don't know really how to do that. I what I did was I went back because y'all know I spent all that money to get my computer with all my work on it, and of course there's the interviews. Two more interviews I have with Linda Oswald. Actually, my name's Joe, but we don't speak about her anyway. And then there was the two interviews prior to the one I played last weekend that Doc Washburn did the first one. Y'all know I can't stand Doc Washburn. I mean, doing this case, like we have breakthroughs after breakthroughs, and he never, he was on KLRN. He never ever wanted anything to do with any of the work we did, which was insane because he acted like he was the end all be all in this case, and he wasn't. And after so long, it was very apparent. Um, yeah, you are a mod for me. I don't know why Christy can't chat in there. That's weird. But anyway, for anybody that's been around for a while, y'all know the history of me and Doc Washburn. We do not like each other. But this is the property of what you'll hear is the United States Patriot Commission, which is what this originally was called. And was called that for a very long time. I mean, even when me and Joe became the JoJo's, it was still and the website's still uspatriotcommission.com or JoJo's for, like I said, we're starting at the very beginning. See, his docs was the first one. Then Sambo, that was the creator of the U.S. Patriot Commission, he was the second one. I was the third one because they were trying to find, Doc didn't want to be the host, the full-time host. He just did it that one time, and then Sambo did it, and then they found me, and you heard my interview last weekend. So they're kind of out of order, but not to the point where you can't follow. But and then you've got later on interviews with Linda that I've got that we're going to play. And I've got the grand jury witness. I've got the Alderman Brad Moore's interview. And we have a lot of good stuff. A lot of good stuff. Midnight says me either. I can't figure it out either. Terry says Midnight can't figure it out. I don't know. I hope. Hey girl, good evening. I've been thinking about you for a while. It's good to see you. HHS 73 girl says, well, I'm not sure what she's saying while too. The chat's a little bit delayed, but everybody say hi to everybody in the chat. Anyways, so I'm gonna play the interview, and because I own the rights to this interview, the one with Doc Washburn, and it's because of Linda and hearing her, and everything takes you back to when this all happened, and what she lived through. And then the one with Sambo is really good. And those are the two we'll play tonight. They're each like 45 minutes long. And then I'm going to read a little bit more of that article, probably after I play the interviews, or maybe in between that we were reading the other night where I stopped it at a certain point. And I think pretty much everything I want to say prior to us playing this. I'm trying to be more productive with my time and be more self-disciplined and organized. Let's see. It points out too, which is very important, and it's the reason I do what I do. My daughter could be the next Kevin Ives and Dawn Henry. Your daughter, son, grandkids, nieces, nephew, parents, grandparents. Wrong place, wrong time. And this is the biggest travesty on the planet. And stop until justice is served. They'll have to kill me to shut me up. I've said this many times, but it is the why as to what I do, because they were just your average, decent, hardworking, middle-class American family. And she talks about this. I mean, and the fact that this happened to them, and just how, I mean, the most unsuspecting people for this to happen to on the planet, and yet it happened. All right, everybody's saying hi. I'm going to go ahead and start this. I don't see any need to prolong it. I do want everybody in chat to, if you can make sure, tell me, make sure you guys can hear this, okay, like y'all did last week. And this is the one, I own the rights to this. You hear Doc Washburn even saying, this is the property of the United States Patriot Commission. I own that as mine. And he knew that then, and he knows that now. So let's play this first one.
This is the first installment of the 2019 Boys on the Tracks interview podcast. The Boys on the Tracks double homicide of 1987 remains one of the most compelling and enduring murder mysteries in modern American history, and certainly in the state of Arkansas. This podcast is a production of the U.S. Patriot Commission. It remains our hope that justice will be done in this and many other cases. Our guest today is Linda Ives, mother of Kevin Ives, one of the victims of the Boys on the Tracks murders in 1987. Linda, tell us about Kevin and what it was like with him growing up in your home.
A little hard to put into words, actually. I guess I was pretty young when I had my children. I think I was 20 when Kevin was born. And he was born actually into a whole bunch of girls. My folks had 2 girls. My sister had 3 girls. And I had Alicia. And then I had Kevin. And so he was really pretty much everybody's boy, literally. My dad was especially close to him. And they spent much of their time together. Kevin used to call him when he was very young, 3 or so, and tell Daddy to come get him to spend the night at his house. And Daddy would say, Kevin, it's dark outside.
Can y'all hear okay?
Kevin would tell him to
somebody let me know.
Turn on his headlights. So, I mean, it was just he was different for all of us. As much as we loved every one of our girls, you know, it was different with Kevin. Just none of us had ever raised a boy or been around a boy much. And it is very different in a lot of ways. I think there's also a really special bond between a mother and a son. Certainly I didn't love him more than I loved Alicia. And probably, maybe was even closer to Alicia, especially as she got a little bit older.
If y'all have any questions or anything to say during
it's
this,
different with the
I can
son,
chat
and
with y'all.
he was a mother's boy, and that's just the way I wanted him. And so it was just it was I felt very fortunate and blessed to have a son and a daughter. I didn't think it got any better than that. And so it was just, we had a good life. We had a good marriage. We had a son and a daughter. They were both good kids that we never had any problems with. And, life was good. Larry worked for the railroad, was a locomotive engineer, and he was in and out of town for all of our lives, my children's life and my life. We were used to him being home one night and gone a day and a half or so. And we all worked our schedule around him. We liked to go to the lake a lot. Kids played ball. Both Alicia and Kevin played ball their growing up years. Kevin started when he was about 6 years old. And we spent a lot of time at the ball field, a lot of time at the lake, just doing ordinary things. I used to ask myself years ago, trying to figure out how on earth my family that was so totally normal and ordinary could get involved in anything to do with all of the things that I think are involved in Kevin's death.
Right. Before we started recording the interview today, you had mentioned kind of a funny anecdote about when Kevin was born and you were bringing him home from the hospital, and apparently your daughter Alicia, who was 2.5 at the time, decided, well, I think I'd like to be the mom too, right?
Absolutely. She just adored him from the very beginning. She wanted to mother him. She wanted to, help diaper him. She wanted to feed him. She wanted to hold him. There was never any rivalry for toys or things as they got just a little bit older. If Kevin wanted it, she gave it to him. There was no question whether or not he would get what he wanted. Having grown up with one sister, and we fought, I think, every day of our lives, literally, half killed each other sometimes. I guess I just expected that it would be like it was when my sister and I fought all the time, but there was never any fighting going on with Kevin and Alicia. And I think I was telling you one story where I had him on a pallet on the floor when he was, I don't know, 6, 7 months old, something like that. And of course, Alicia would have been 3 by that time. And I looked up and she had him by the leg, dragging him behind her down the hall to her room. And of course, I nearly freaked out over it. And I, ran and grabbed him and everything. I said, Alicia, what are you doing? And she says, I'm taking to my room to play. And that was just the way it was with them. And it was, even as they got older, of course, I'm sure they had skirmishes, maybe even some I didn't know about. I don't know. But, there was just never all of the fighting that went on like there was in my household when I was growing up. So it was, it was an easy existence, actually. I think for most of us, all of us, things were good. We had the kids and had fun and enjoyed them and their activities. And, we had a boat. We had I'm not boasting or gloating or anything, but we had everything we needed, certainly, and a lot of what we wanted. And a lot of the things that we had particularly because we wanted the kids to hang out at our house. The neighborhood kids hung out at our house as they became teenagers. We had, like a trampoline and a pool and a pool table and, anything I thought that would entertain them, that would keep them interested in at home. And that's where all the kids hung out.
And then eventually Kevin got his driver's license.
He did get his driver's license, of course, when he turned 16. The big highlight of his life, I suppose, as he didn't live too much longer after that. But he turned 16, and in our neighborhood there were 8 little boys who were all the same age, and they all ran around together from the time they were young. They played ball together and grew up through high school together. And I knew all of them. I knew all of their parents. They lived in our neighborhood, and I was comfortable with the things that all of the kids were allowed to do, the rules and everything of their homes. But when he got his car, things, of course, changed, and he spread his wings, I guess is, I think, one way to put it. And he and his best friend Mike Mitchell had recently had a falling out over a girl. They both liked the same girl, and so Kevin became good friends with Don. Met him at school.
Don Henry.
With Don Henry, yes. And I remember him telling stories about things Don did and said all the time. And he thought Don was just really funny and fun to be around. From the things that he told me, I didn't know Don. In fact, I only saw him a time or two when he was at the house. And but I didn't know his parents at all. And so mothers are mothers, overprotective mothers especially. It was just a different situation for me. And of course, anytime you let a teenager go with a car, it's a stressful time anyway. And so there were some growing pains there, I think, more on my part than anybody else's part. It's just hard to let go of any child a little bit. And my kids always thought I held on a little too tightly and was overprotective. But I know now that there is no such thing as being overprotective.
That's true.
So Kevin and Don began running around together and began doing things he had never done before, and things like that every parent stresses over, I suppose. And but we never had any problems. In fact, we'd bought Kevin a car for his birthday, an older Camaro, and we used it a lot as leverage, as most parents do, as an incentive to keep grades up, or to stay within the rules and regulations, if you will. And we never had any trouble with him. Actually, I anticipated it, but he never did have any trouble. Alicia, and part of the problem with Kevin, I think, our fears that really never materialized with Kevin came from Alicia, who was, if there was ever a good child, it was Alicia, and you could depend on her, and you could also depend on Kevin. But Alicia was like a straight A student, and I don't know, she just never did anything, to worry us or give us concern. But she was a terrible driver.
Oh.
And she had in fact, the day we bought her car, or her and Larry and her went to pick it up, she turned it over underwater on the way home.
She turned it over underwater.
Yes.
Perhaps
my biggest fear.
Perhaps you could kind of amplify on that, because it's a difficult word picture.
It was, talk about your parents' worst fear with a new driver. They had bought her car in Stuttgart, and her and her daddy had gone to pick it up, and they were on the way home, and the car had electric windows, and this was back in 1985, I guess. And at that point in time, I hadn't even been allowed to have electric windows by Larry, because he was afraid that if you were ever in a wreck and underwater, you wouldn't be able to get out the windows. I mean, that was just some kind of crazy hang up he had. And so at that point, I hadn't had a car with electric windows, but this car they didn't make without electric windows. It was a little Nissan 200 SX sport car. And so he did not want to buy that car because of that. And he and her had many conversations about that, but ended up buying the car for her, of course. And when they went to get it, they had just gotten out on the highway and built up their speed to about 55. Alicia was following Larry because she didn't know the way home, of course. And he was watching her in the rearview mirror, he says, and was kind of watching how the car tracked and that kind of thing. And all of a sudden, it was like she made a right-hand turn. He said, it's like she just made a sharp right. And it's through England where the rice fields are, and there were deep ditches.
England, Arkansas.
England,
yes.
Arkansas, yes. And the deep ditches on either side, and they were filled with water. And when she made that right-hand turn, it just rolled. And it was about halfway submerged. And of course, Larry had to stop and turn around and run back and get to her. He said he could hear her screaming, from the highway. And he said, all I could think of was to find a rock. Where was the rock that he could break a window with? And of course, panic stricken, needless to say. And he said, but he knew she was alive at least because he could hear her screaming. And what she was screaming about, she didn't realize she was upside down, and she didn't realize she was underwater until she tried to open the door, and a little water came in the door, and then that scared her. And she said the first thing she thought of was, Mama's going to be so mad at me because she was drinking a Diet Coke, and I warned her about drinking and eating in the car and ruining the interior. And she's going to know I was drinking Coke and spilled it all inside this car. And of course, when she got out of the car, they got her out. Larry and some passerbys got her out, and she was standing on the road up there. And when a wrecker got there, he had to pull her car out on its top and open the doors and let all the water drain out of it. And of course, it was muddy. And she was just panic stricken because first day she had her car, she had messed up the interior of it. But anyway, she went on to have a number of wrecks after that, like regularly.
But the thing about the car being full of water and mud is that would tend to obscure that there had been some Diet Coke making a mess, right? Yeah.
And she was all worried about her white shorts at the time, it seems like.
Well, who wouldn't be? Yeah.
I know. So, but anyway, we survived that. She went on to have probably 6 or 8 wrecks in a short period of time thereafter. The only thing I can say is the worst thing about I can think of with Alicia was she was a terrible driver. And of course, I still think she is, but she hadn't had any wrecks in a good long while. She even wrecked my car while her car was being fixed one time. So with Kevin, when we went to buy his car,
you expected possibly that he would
thought, oh
take
my
after
gosh,
his sister.
Yeah, if it was this bad with Alicia, what on earth is it going to be like with Kevin,
because
a boy?
There's the thought that boys tend to be worse drivers,
yes,
especially when they're young.
Absolutely. And so, we just lived in dread of Kevin driving. And so Alicia's car was almost new when we bought it, had a few miles on it. So Larry and I talked about it, and all, of course, our insurance was at the roof. Oh, it was higher than our house payment because of all of her wrecks. We got to where we didn't even turn them in, and because of the insurance. So then when we went and added Kevin to our insurance, being a boy and his age of 16, it was like, oh my gosh, do we have to take out a loan to, buy insurance? So when we were looking for him a car, we thought, well, and he wanted a Camaro. He was very set on what kind of car he wanted. So we made him go back to the year model where the body style changed and the insurance dropped. It was a
good idea.
It was a money savings plan for us to go to a little bit older Camaro for that reason. And it was a really nice car. It was sharp, had T-tops. He loved it. He totally loved his car as much as anything in the whole world, I guess. Maybe besides his dog, Jake. and I would come home nearly every afternoon from working at Alcoa Credit Union at the time, and he'd be in the front yard washing his car every day. And I mean, he kept it spotless, and he was so proud of it. And it was interesting. We had friends, from Bryant and elsewhere at the time, and we had a couple of people tell us that they were so proud to report to us that, every time they saw Kevin in his car, that he was never showing out or driving fast or doing anything he shouldn't be doing. And he was coming to visit their daughter, actually. He'd go visit all of his girlfriends. And but we had a couple of them tell us that, Kevin was doing what he was supposed to be doing, and he never put a mark on his car, not one. So our fears were unfounded as far as his driving were concerned. Of course, if he'd lived longer, who knows, things might have gotten differently out of hand later on. I don't know. But unfortunately, he didn't live long enough to have it very long. He turned 16 in, I guess it was, can't do the math, about 86. I think we got his car in 86.
Yeah.
He hadn't had it very long when he was killed. In fact, when we put that car up for sale, we kept it for years, actually, about 5 or 6 years, because I couldn't stand to part with it. Larry would talk about selling it because it was deteriorating, and it was sitting in our garage when we had a new vehicle sitting out in the weather. And Larry kept telling me off and on that we needed to sell it. And I would cry and throw a fit every time. And it would sit for a good long while again before it was mentioned again. But we finally did put it up for sale a few years later. Larry ran an ad on it, and he told me when he left town that, I might get some calls on it. But some man called and was asking about it, and he wanted to know if the car was adult driven or if it belonged to a kid. And of course, my hairs on my arms were already standing up, and tears were already welling up in my eyes just at the idea of talking about it with someone. And I told him, I said, well, it was owned by my son. And his next question to me was, well, what did he do? Rag it out or something? And it took me by total surprise. And I was, trying to decide actually what to say to him, whether to be nice or to be ugly.
And of course, he had no idea.
No, he had no idea. And I said, well, no, he didn't rag it out. Unfortunately, he was killed first before he had an opportunity to. He didn't drive it very long. And there was dead, total silence on the. Well, I put him in his place. And he got off real quick. He later called back and talked to Larry, I guess the next day, and wanted to come out and see the car. And he had told Larry what happened. I hadn't mentioned it to Larry, but he had told Larry what happened in the conversation. And he had asked Larry to apologize for him. And Larry came in and told me that. And he said, this guy wants to come look at Kevin's car. He said, I just wanted you to know. And of course, I immediately started crying, stomped off, slammed the door, everything else that always happened when we discussed it. And so the guy came and looked at the car, and Larry came in a while later and said, Linda, he wants to buy the car. And I said, don't you go down one penny on that car. I said, he's going to pay full price for it. Not one penny less. He said, Linda, you're being, irrational here. And because he'd, set the price to in order to come down a little bit like you usually do.
Sure.
And he said, you're being irrational. I said, I don't care what I'm being, not one penny less. You can get that car for one penny less, Larry. And so Larry left the house, and he came back in and he said, Linda, he said, I'm taking Kevin's things out of the car because they were still in there. His brush and all of the things that belonged to him that he had left in the car. And he said, do you want to come out and look at the car again? And of course, I couldn't even talk. I was crying so hard. And, I told him, no, I did not want to see it again. So just tell him to get in it and drive it off. And I said, you didn't take less money for it, did you, Larry? And he never did even answer my questions. I'm sure he did. But anyway, it was very traumatic. I guess because, and that's the thing he identified with the most, I guess. The thing he loved the most at the time. And that was I think that was one of the very hardest things ever, for me.
Tell me what happened and tell the people listening what happened August 15th, 1987.
August 23rd.
Well, that was the first night that Kevin spent the night with Don Henry.
Oh, no. This was the weekend before. This was the 15th. This is crazy.
I was immediately uncomfortable with it, not for any reason other than the fact I didn't know Don and I didn't know his parents. I mean, I didn't have any reason to, other than that, to have any reason not to let him. But, all I can say was I was immediately uncomfortable with it. And, but he argued with me, and I first told him no. And he said, Mother, I am 17 years old. He said, you're telling me I can't spend the night with a friend, and of course it was Mother letting go a little bit. That's what he was trying to tell me. So he, basically talked me into it. I relented, and he spent the night with Don. I had asked what time Don had to be in at night because Kevin had a curfew of 12:30, and I wanted to make sure he wasn't out running around all night long. Of course, no reason to believe they would be. I just, I didn't know. I didn't know what, what Don was allowed to do and what he wasn't allowed to do.
Right.
And so anyway, we had that conversation, and I told him, I said, Kevin, you better be in by 12:30. He said, I will be, Mom, I will be. And the next morning, Curtis called me about 10 o'clock. He said, are the boys at your house?
No, listen.
Well, that's not a good sign.
And I was just, I was shocked. I was,
the weekend before.
I don't even know how to describe really what I was. I was immediately panicky. And I said, what are you talking about, Curtis? They're supposed to have been at your house. And he said, well, and I said, did they not come in last night? And he said, no, they came in about 12:15. And, well, I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, Doc. That was the next one.
Let me, real quick. What she's going to tell you about where they ended up staying was with Dawn's sister, Gayla, who at the time lived with none other than Freddie Poe. Now, remember, fast forward 30-something years, and I'm doing these podcasts, and Freddie Poe, turns out he was on the tracks that night because he was one of the drug mules, one of the pack mules, along with Gayla. And the weekend before, that's where they stayed. They, instead of going home to Curtis's, to Dawn's dad, where they were supposed to stay, you'll find out that's where they ended up going. See, and like re-listening to these, it's like, wow. I mean, that's just proof that puts everything together, like with the Freddie Poe connection and all that. But you guys remember Freddie Poe, they killed him the day before he was supposed to talk to me. And no one, that proves my stuff's hacked, because no one on the planet knew we were going to talk except for me, him, and the person that put us together. And he was found dead in his bed on his knees, with his inhaler in one hand and his necklace, cross necklace, in his mouth. He used to, when he was in pain, he would bite down on his necklace, on the cross, and which means he was in pain. They said he died of natural causes. His Rottweiler was poisoned, was found blood everywhere. And was told on really good authority, Kirk Lane, who was one of the two murderers of Kevin Ives and Don Henry back then, was our drug director at this time that Asa Hutchinson appointed, but his niece was involved in helping kill Freddie Poe. I don't know that I've ever told y'all that.
Okay. He said that
Yeah,
they
we're
had
talking
come
about-
in. Yeah.
Talking about the
Right.
Saturday, August 15th.
Yeah, the week before the boys were killed was the first night he spent the night with Don. And
Right, the week before. Yeah.
the week before. And so anyway, he wanted to know if the boys were at my house, and I told him, I was shocked and asked him what he was talking about, that they were supposed to spend the night with him. And he said, well, he and Don had gotten into an argument the night before, and both boys had stormed out of the house and left in Kevin's car.
And by the way, I have
And he
super
thought they were
chats on.
going
Anybody
to
wants to send a
Florida,
super
where
chat.
Don's biological mother lived. And I mean, that was just, the craziest thing I had ever heard. I knew without a doubt that Kevin Ives would never get in his car and take off for Florida. I mean, I didn't know where they were, but I knew they weren't headed for Florida.
And Kevin knew that you and Larry would tend to frown upon him making that sort of unilateral decision.
Oh, absolutely. He knew without a doubt that, that was almost the death knell of his car ownership.
Yeah.
If something like that had happened. He was barely allowed to go to Little Rock at that point when he was first driving. We were at first made him stay around Benton and, very locally. And.
So what happened that was a Friday night into Saturday morning or Saturday night into Sunday morning?
Saturday night into Sunday morning.
So what happened that Sunday morning when he had called?
Yes, I know the son of God is watching.
And wondering where the boys were because his son had stormed out because he had an argument with his dad.
Well, after he told me he thought they'd gone to Florida, and I told him absolutely that had not happened. And he said he was going to check with Don's older sister, Gayla Henry, and see if they were over there. I was ready to call the police and the National Guard just about. I was so upset. And so he said let him check with Gayla first. And then he would call me back. And then I got the phone call again from him actually, Doc, I can't seem to keep them straight in my head here.
Talking about the
Larry was home. Yeah, Larry was home and he was called to go to work, as a locomotive engineer. They were on call, and he had been called and was about to leave the house when we found out that, Kevin and Don were not where they were supposed to be. And so he laid off work, which is calling their dispatcher and telling them, they were going to have to get somebody else, that he couldn't go. Because we didn't know where Kevin was at that point. And, he wasn't about to leave town, not knowing where Kevin was.
So Curtis called his daughter's house, Gayla.
No, he actually drove over there because she didn't have a phone. So
in the meantime.
Well, in the meantime, Larry and I were making phone calls to Kevin's friends and everything, and kind of waiting on Curtis to call back and let us know, what Gayla had to say. And actually, we were very frantic and doing everything we knew to we could do from the house as far as contacting people.
But Kevin just walked in the door, right?
Kevin just sauntered in the door.
As if everything was fine.
He had no idea that we knew that they had not spent the night at Don's house.
Aha.
And he just came strolling in the door.
Hey, how's everybody?
And we were shocked. He was shocked. And of course, we were all over him, mad for worrying about him, number one, mad because Larry had laid off work, number two, and missed, basically when you lay off work from the railroad, as a crew member for the train, you miss about 2 or 2.5 days of work, which, is no small amount of money anywhere when you lose that off of a paycheck. But so we were very upset with him, very angry, and And so, needless to say, we laid down the law to him in a number of ways.
Yes. So here you have this experience. Saturday, August 15th, going into Sunday morning, August 16th. Great concern, trepidation. What on earth happened to my son? And then he comes just strolling in like everything's fine, not knowing that Don Henry's dad, Curtis, has called you
Exactly.
at 10 o'clock on Sunday morning saying, are the boys at your house? And you're like, what are you talking about? And then I guess
Can you imagine?
Your son, Kevin, and Don Henry, because Don had a spat with his dad, did wind up staying at his sister's house that night?
Yes, they did spend
Okay.
the night with Galen that night.
Galen.
And so everybody breathes a great sigh of relief when Kevin walks in the door on that Sunday morning, August 16th, 1987. But you and Larry not too happy about Larry missing 2.5 days of work. And so some new rules are laid down.
Yeah, well, I don't know that they were new rules. They were certainly reinforced in his mind.
Okay, yeah.
For certain. And I told Kevin, I said, you need to call Curtis Henry and tell him where Don is, because he thinks y'all are on the way to Florida. And Kevin thought that was about as crazy as I did.
Sure.
But and he said, you gotta be kidding me, Mother. And I said, no, he doesn't know where Don is. You need to call him.
Right.
And he said, and I said, call him and tell him where Don is. And he said, I'll call Curtis. But he said, I'm not going to tell him where Don is. He said, I'll tell him he's not on his way to Florida and he's okay.
Yeah.
But he said, I'm not telling him where he is. He said, that's between him and Don. He said, I don't want to get into that.
Yeah.
He said, that's between them.
But I'll at least tell him he's safe and sound.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And that's what happened.
So the next weekend, which would be Saturday, August 22nd, Sunday, August 23rd, Kevin wanted to go spend the night at Don's house the next Saturday night.
Yeah, they called me again that following Saturday night. They'd been cruising the springs like they did just about every weekend, and most kids did, which was cruising up and down Govar Springs Road and congregating in parking lots with other kids and visiting and that kind of thing. And
Govar Springs Road, for people outside Central Arkansas, is in the southwest Little Rock.
Correct. And of course, when he said he wanted to spend the night with Don, it was, oh no, absolutely not. We're not doing this again. And he argued with me, and we had all of the conversation you would expect. I told him I wasn't going to have a repeat of what happened the weekend before, and he told me that he and Don's dad were fine, and there wasn't going to be a problem. And I said, y'all just need to stay over at our house, Kevin. Just y'all stay over here this time. And he said, Mom, his dad is already expecting us. We've already talked to him. And so
she carried this with her
for better or worse, bad or ugly. I had this thing, and I guess maybe still do. I don't know. But opportunities to teach lessons. I thought you needed to take advantage of certain opportunities to teach certain lessons. And, one of the things that was high on my list for sure was being trustworthy, and how trust is earned and that kind of thing. So we had a little bit of that conversation, and I thought, well, this is a good time to, show him that I can still trust him, and, he's going to have to show me, that he can be trusted.
And I guess from his perspective, going back to the weekend before, he probably would not have thought it was a good idea to call you guys late at night, perhaps waking you up, to say, well, Don and his dad got in an argument, so we're just going to go spend the night at Don's sister's house.
Right. I'm sure he thought, well, they'll never know. It's probably
Maybe a
what
little
went
bit
through
of,
there, maybe a little bit of both.
maybe a little bit of both.
Yeah. Plus the fact that, well, Gayla didn't have a phone, and apparently he and Don walked out of the house pretty abruptly. So they went straight to Gayla's and spent the night.
So going back to the next weekend, Saturday, August 22nd, you're having this discussion with Kevin, and you're thinking that perhaps you'll go ahead and give in, relent, because he always has been trustworthy.
Exactly. And, the worst decision I guess I've ever made in my life. Certainly the one that I've regretted most over the years. But did relent. I did call Curtis Henry, and I told him, I said, Curtis, Kevin's called me and he wants to spend the night again. Are you aware of that? And he said, yes, he knew that. And I said, is everything okay between you and Dawn? I said, I know neither one of us want a repeat of what happened last week.
Right.
And he said, oh no. He said, everything's fine between Dawn and I. And he said, everything will be fine, Linda. And I said, he said, everything's okay. And I said, well, and they're supposed to be in by 12:30, of course. And I said, you know what, if Kevin Ives isn't in by 12:30, would you give me a call? I said, I'm, even if it's 12:31, I want a phone call if Kevin Ives isn't in your house.
Right.
And he said, absolutely, no problem. He said, everything will be fine, Linda. And so I assumed everything would be fine.
And certainly he did too.
I'm sure he did. Yeah, I'm sure he did. I'm not insinuating he was a bad parent. He certainly didn't have the same rules that we had at our house.
Right.
Number one, Larry would have never, ever, ever allowed Kevin Ives to go out hunting at night, to go out hunting in August for deer that was not in season, and to go spotlighting deer, which was illegal.
Well, that's illegal even in season, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It was just something that Larry would have never, ever, ever allowed Kevin to do, and he certainly wouldn't have allowed anybody else's children to do it. And so, that was also something that was very difficult for Larry. Kevin had never even been deer hunting, never wanted to. He and Larry squirrel hunted every year, but neither one of them, deer hunted. But Kevin had begun wanting to, and so and been telling Larry about it. And in hindsight, I'm sure it's because Don deer hunted.
Sure.
And so Larry had bought him a deer rifle for his birthday, which he never got an opportunity to shoot. They were planning to go sight it in the following day. So it was just a
rifle.
Just seemed like the perfect storm for a lot of things, unfortunately.
And then I guess the most difficult part of this interview is the phone call that you get from Don Henry's father, Curtis Henry, on Sunday morning, August 23rd, a week to the day after the call on Sunday the 16th, when he said, by the way, are the boys at your house? You get a very different kind of call on Sunday, August 23rd, 1987.
Exactly. Curtis called again that morning, wanted to know if the boys were at my house. And I don't know. I don't know whether I screamed at him. I don't know what I did, but it was so unbelievable to me that the very same thing seemed to have happened again, with, Kevin spending the night with Dawn. I couldn't believe it. I was just dumbstruck really by the question. And I said, Curtis, what are you talking about? I said, they were supposed to spend the night with you. And I said, you remember our conversation last night? And so he said, well, Linda, he said, I think probably what happened is that they're at Gayla's again. They probably used the hunting as an excuse to get out of the house.
No. Okay, if you go back to the podcast before this one, where I broke it down and told y'all exactly what happened that night. The wagon wheel and all that, they never got a chance to go. And to the woods to go spotlight deer. But I said, and I quote, they were being sneaky teenagers and used that as an excuse to get out of the house after curfew, because that was the only way Dawn would be allowed to go out of the house after curfew at 12 or 12:30, whatever it was his dad would let him go spotlight deer, which is illegal. So negative on Curtis's end that he would let his son do that. But the fact that Linda literally says, and I hadn't heard these interviews, but one time it was like 4 years ago, because I listened to prep for when I interviewed her that you heard last weekend. But I said, if more than anything, it was an excuse. They never got a chance to go. And if they were going to go, it was going to be after they left the wagon wheel and scored their pot. Then it could be very likely they were going to go. But that's how come they had the flashlight and he went in to borrow the flashlight from his dad, like to make it all look like they were being sneaky teenagers. It was their excuse to get out of the house. And you had Keith Coney on his motorcycle at the end of the road. That's how they both ended up on foot, but then they ended up on the motorcycle, but their cars were still at the house that night and the next day. And you had 3 eyewitnesses of the motorcycle. Number one, Keith Coney, who was killed shortly after that, murdered. And then the Ronnie Godwin guy and the Sketchy Jerry. So, and they also confirmed Kirk Lane and Jay Campbell. Shirley Spears says, I'm a granny raising 2 grands, and this world has gotten so much more crazier these days. And when their friends go here or there and do what they want, it's hard for them to understand why. Yeah, man. I mean, in this case is just, and that's why I was so messy, everything about it and the aftermath, because these were unplanned murders. They were spur of the moment. They walked in the wagon wheel, wrong place, wrong time. Everybody unloading those drugs from the drug drop. They never saw the drop. They saw the drugs from the drop. Bill Clinton's there. Bob Govar, my father-in-law, who wasn't my father-in-law at the time. In the future, he became my father-in-law. You had the Pulaski County Sheriff. I mean, you had everybody there. And then all the drug mules, including Gayla Henry. She was in there unloading her backpack along with Freddie Poe and all the other drug mules, Charlene Wilson, and I've got a list of them. And that was her brother and Kevin and Keith Coney that walked in there. So she knew all this time what happened to him. And so anyway, I just wanted to point out that what she just said there, that Curtis said they were probably using as an excuse to get out after curfew. Exactly what I said last weekend. And I've said all along, and it just so happens now we've got Linda from the grave literally talking, and as I go back and re-listen, I'm picking up on things that just solidify everything I've said. Anyway.
And went over to a party at Gala's and just went to sleep. And I'm sitting there trying to process this again, and I said, Curtis, did they take guns? And he said, of course they took guns. You have to have guns to hunt. And I'm sitting there saying, did they go hunting? Did they go to Gala's? What on earth is this crazy man talking about?
Right.
And so I told him, I said, well, I'm calling the police. He said, well, no, let me run over at Gala's and see if they're over there. He said, I think they're probably over there. And so I waited to hear from Curtis again and was totally panic stricken, was there alone. Alicia had already started college of her sophomore year at the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville. Larry was on a run to Poplar Bluff, Missouri on a train.
Yeah.
And I was standing there trying to figure out what on earth I should do. Did I call Larry? Did I call the police? Did I what to do when the phone rang again? And, when it rang, I was literally afraid to answer it. I didn't really have anything in mind that I was fearing other than maybe a car wreck. My biggest fear was a car wreck or something, as with all parents of teenagers that are driving.
Yes.
And so I was just filled with dread, filled with fear, and trying to figure things out. And when I picked up the phone, the first thing out of Curtis's mouth was, "You need to come over here quick. They've been tied up, shot, and put on the railroad tracks and run over by a train." And I don't know. I was so stunned. If he had said car wreck, I might could have processed that a little bit. But all I thought when I was listening to his words was, this man is crazy. I think he's really crazy.
Right.
I mean, that truly was my thought. I just couldn't figure out what on earth was going on. It was just too much to process. And I guess my mind just did not accept it. I don't know. It was like, it was almost like being out of body. That's a crazy expression.
Out of body experience.
But out of body. It was like I was standing there listening and watching somebody besides me. And so I told him, I said, "Curtis, I don't even know where you live." And he started rattling off his address, and I was fumbling for a pen and paper to write it down on, and my hands were shaking so hard. I have never before or ever since shook as hard as I was shaking that day. It was as if my whole body was just in some sort of seizure or something. And I finally told him, I said, "Curtis, I can't write. I can't write." And I said, "What's your phone number?" And I managed, after several tries there of making him repeat, I got his number, scrawled down on a piece of paper, and I just hung up the phone. And so I did what I'd have always done before. We have some great friends and neighbors that we'd lived by for over 20 years. And, he was always my go-to guy when Larry was out of town and I needed something.
Right.
And I used to jokingly tell him all the time that I invited him to all of my crises, because if anything was going to happen, it was going to be when Larry was out of town. Set my house on fire one time. I don't know what all. But anyway, LA's who I called when I needed something. So I picked up the phone and I called LA. And, it was like I couldn't talk. I don't know. I felt like I don't know. I just felt like I couldn't even speak. And I thought he was going to hang up the phone. And I finally just sort of blurted out. I said, "LA, I need you." And there's quite a bit of distance. Our house was on 3 acres and their house was on nearly 3 acres. So it wasn't like right next door. There was a pathway through some woods that was heavily traveled because his son Jody was one of Kevin's real good friends. They were the same age, and he was one of the neighborhood boys that was always together. And we traveled together, we vacationed together, we socialized together all the time. So it was a well-worn path, and it wasn't, but I don't know, seemed like 2 or 3 minutes or so. And he was in my kitchen, looking at me like, "What is wrong? What's going on?" And of course, he knew something had happened to somebody. He could see I was clearly traumatized. And so.
Because Curtis Henry specifically said they've been tied up, shot, and run over by a train. And of course, you're thinking he's speaking English, but this doesn't make any sense at all.
Oh,
you can't process it.
It did not make any sense. I was worried, of course, that something had happened. But I didn't for 1 minute believe that they had been shot and tied to the railroad tracks and run over by a train. I just thought, this guy's crazy. He's crazy.
Right.
And so when LA asked me what was wrong, I couldn't even make myself say the words. He says, and he kept asking me, he said, "Linda, what's wrong? What's wrong?" And he said, "What can I do? What do you need me for?" And I just pointed to that piece of paper and I said, call that number and get an address for whoever answers the phone. And he did it immediately. No more questions of me. When he called Curtis, he didn't ask him anything. He just said, I need your address.
Yeah.
And Curtis gave it to him, and he hung up and looked at me and he said, now what? And I said, well, we've got to go over there. And he said, okay, I'll go get my car. And I was already fumbling for my car keys. And, we were both shaking. And his wife walked in about that time. Well, actually, I had told LA when he kept questioning me what was wrong. And I said, I have to go straighten something out about Kevin. Because in my mind, that's what I was going to do.
Exactly.
Go straighten out the crazy guy.
Right. Exactly.
And figure out what was going on and where Kevin and Don were. And, Kevin Ives was never going to spend the night over there again. That was for certain. But so about that time, his wife came running in the door. And, she knew something was terribly wrong by looking at both of us. And, she finally said, Linda, what's wrong? Of course, I think they thought it was Larry. And, I rather calmly said, this man told me that Kevin had been shot and tied to the railroad tracks and run over by a train, which was the first time I had said that. And it was just like, I don't know what it was. It was like just saying the words just made my whole body jar. I don't know what to call it. And Gail just literally fell to the floor on her knees. And, I felt very impatient with her, and I thought, this is the last thing I need, And I said, get up, Gail. I said, call my sister and tell her to get over here. And Ella and I left and went over to Curtis's house.
And this concludes the first installment of the 2019 Boys on the Tracks interview podcast. The Boys on the Tracks double homicide in 1987. One of the most compelling and enduring murder mysteries of modern American history, perhaps certainly in the state of Arkansas. Our guest today has been Linda Ives, mother of Kevin Ives, one of the victims of the Boys on the Tracks murders in 1987. Episode number 2 of this podcast, a production of the U.S. Patriot Commission, should be produced soon. It remains our hope that justice will be done in this and many other cases. So concludes the first installment of the 2019 Boys on the Tracks interview podcast from the U.S. Patriot Commission.
Okay, that's the conclusion of take 1, which is podcast 1, which again, that was Doc Washburn. But I own the rights to that interview. As much as he and I can't stand each other, this is a necessary interview. It's not about him. It's about Linda and her telling her story, which I've told y'all before. Like, you think people doing this, you think people would team up, and don't know. That's why I fly solo. People get jealous, territorial, whatever. But yet I still, even the ones I know are better, I can't stand, like, I still will, if it's necessary to hear, like this was, it's for the greater good of the case, I'm going to do it. Okay. That's how you know I'm the real deal. And I actually do care. Because I even told you last weekend, and I'll still tell you, the Ron Dane videos, who he would steal my work and put them in his videos. He's done it more than once and not give credit to JoJo's for, like, I get so sick and tired of being taken advantage of constantly. Yet I'm still telling you, go watch his videos because you'll learn so much from him. It's the Carnage on Ice channel is the name of the channel. Boys on the Tracks Murders. And he was able to make several more videos because of my work. Okay. But he's the one that always says Gene Duffy was good. Gene Duffy makes sure. She's the one who came in between all this. This is why you have Doc's interview. Then the next one, Sambo, because he hadn't hired a host yet. Then he hired me, Then I'm the third interview, which you heard last week on the podcast before this one. And then Gene, all hell breaks loose, and the United States Patriot Commission's about to go on the toilet, and did. And I salvaged it because I knew if there was one shot ever to finally find the truth out, to ever get justice, this was it. This was like Linda Ives' last shot. And I did everything, and I'll tell that story sometime, but I did everything in my power to salvage it. And then we pivoted to, I got a co-host, which was Amy Jo, and started doing it there with her instead of interviewing Linda Ives, which Gene Duffy made Linda turn on Sam, who created the commission, who Linda was on board with. I'm skipping ads for y'all. You're welcome. They keep coming up. It's too important for the ads to come up. They can play in the replay. But anyway, what a mess it turned into. And like I said, in the podcast for this one, the last week, I was halfway down there when I get the call, say, turn around, Gene Duffy. And she did everything she could to shut down what we were doing. And then she made the threat, if I ever come for her in the podcast, she'll sue me. Well, the only reason I never came from her and I never mentioned her name was because Linda was still alive. And as long as Linda was alive, I wasn't going to do anything to put away what Gene Duffy was trying to do. I saw it. And I wasn't going to do anything that would put a wedge between, Linda Ives and I, for the sake of the case. And for the sake of everything we've been doing. And that was hard, but I bit my tongue for so long. I don't have to buy it anymore. I don't have to. And you remember you heard about how the weekend, but that's what's so gut-wrenching too. Everything about this is, but that Linda said, no, hell no, you ain't going back over there the second time, which is when they got murdered. And Kevin begged and pleaded. So Linda lived with that every day of her life, that, because of what happened the weekend before, he was never going to go over there again. And he ended up talking her into it. And then they end up murdered. And again, I talked about how Curtis had told her, which is right. That's what I've told y'all, that but the spotlight in there was more of an excuse to get out after curfew. And it's a very good chance they were going to actually do that after they got their pot at the wagon wheel. They never get that chance. They were chased on the motorcycle. They ran out of the wagon wheel, and Kirk on the motorcycle, and and then go chase Kirk Lane and Jay Campbell. Bill Clinton said, kill those boys. They jumped in their unmarked police car. They were always in for drug nights and followed them. And that's when the payphone scenario happened, incident, whatever. And we'll get into more. The next one we're going to play, it's about 45 minutes. This is Sambo, one who created the commission. He interviews Linda. This is right before he found me and hired me to do it. And then the way Sambo hasn't been in the picture for years, Amy Jo and I took off with it. We ended up becoming the JoJos and everything under the United States Patriot Commission. And he messaged one day and just said, y'all are doing such a hell of a job. You're doing like, I'm just going to turn this over to you. He gave me all the equipment, the laptop, I had the fancy speakers and all that, but really the software is so good, you really don't need it. But we use that forever. I still have it, but I don't have anywhere to hook it all up. So we just make do. But anyway, and then we probably had 200 members if we have one to our website, people paying either $5 a month or $20 a month. Sometimes they sign up for the yearly, knowing there really wasn't that much there. It was just to contribute, a way to financially help. And then when Amy Jo pulled everything she did, and then, you know, we got sued. Amy Jo supposedly tried to commit suicide. She deleted our channel, and this computer was down, so I couldn't even access all our work then. Like, she did just, I mean, she screwed me completely and totally financially. And let me tell you, every penny that was being earned was earned, and then some. So I'm starting from scratch. I still have my website because I believe I can build it back up. It is jojosforjustice.org. There's no hyphen in that. It's just JOJOS for justice.org. Anybody that can sign up, there's a $10 a month plan or $20 a month plan. It helps. And because I meant to go over all this earlier, do it now because I forget to ask for help. My Cash App is $ ShellyJoGovar, ShellyJoGov, V as in Victor AR. My PayPal is just at ShellyJoGovar. And again, the website, jojosforjustice.org. All right, we're gonna play the one Sambo did. It's about 45 minutes, and then we'll talk for a minute, and I may read some of that article, and then we'll sign off. We've been on here an hour and 20, so I'm trying to keep this one at 3 hours max, and by the time we finish this interview, I can keep it even at 2.5. It just depends, but it depends on there's so much information to get out. And what I realized too, like, and by the way, I haven't cussed. Are y'all proud of me? Third podcast in, I haven't cussed, like I said. I think my problem's been too, I've been reflecting, and every podcast, I feel like I had to get everything out and all in one sitting, you know, because there's so much. And I'm like, no, I mean, it's impossible. I could sit there and talk till the end of time and never end the stream and keep on live till I took my last breath, and I'd still never get everything out. So it's like, I always felt this, I don't know if the word's pressure on myself to just get out as much as I could. And it was like a fire hose of information. It was too much. And I realized all that. And it can still be too much, even doing it this way, as organized as I've been. It's still a lot. All right. If anybody wants to comment and chat, you know, y'all keep it going. I'm very proud of you. Thank you, Shirley. Thank you. I'm proud of myself. I am. And whether I'm supposed to say that or not, I am. I've come a very long ways. And the fact that I have resaved this platform 3 times now. Third time's a charm. This is my third attempt to, and this time's going to be successful. Midnight says, very proud of you. Thank you. Thank you. I'm very proud of you too. Pitt says, thank you. Y'all know, y'all been here with me for the long haul. Oh my gosh. I know y'all can see a difference. I had a lot of people message me and tell me that too afterwards. And please, if you want to compliment me, I want to hear it, because it's what gives me more confidence and lets me know, okay, I finally got it right this time, you know, or I'm getting it right, you know. Not perfect. As you can see, I still smoke, and I'm going to continue to, but I'm being very disciplined in other areas. And so at the end of the day, I'm still me. And as much as I love to cuss, it's one of my top 3 favorite things to do on the planet is to cuss. And I'm not cussing because I don't want to lose people over it. You're doing great. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, ma'am, you have, Shirley says. Told me I've come a long way. Okay. Thank you so much. That makes me want to cry. Okay, let me pull up. This will be Sambo's. I'll play it.
This is the second installment of the 2019 Boys on the Track.
Oh no.
The Boys on the Tracks 7 is one of the most compelling and enduring murder mysteries of modern American history.
Let me know if
certainly
y'all can hear
in
this
the state of
okay.
Arkansas. The podcast is a production of the
Thank you,
United States
Kim.
Patriot Commission.
Thank you.
It remains our hope that justice will be done in this and many other
I'm gonna
cases.
go.
Our guest today is Linda Ives, mother of Kevin Ives, one of the victims of the Boys on the Tracks murders in
I'll be right
1987.
back.
Linda, we were talking to you last week and we left off with you in the kitchen and you had just gotten a phone call from Curtis Henry.
Okay.
Yes, I had
Plan
just
or-
talked to Curtis Henry. The words out of his mouth were for me to come quick, that the boys had been shot, tied to the railroad tracks, and run over by a train. And my first thought was, this man is crazy. You know, we'd had an earlier incident where the boys who were supposed to spend the night with him had not, and it was a total fiasco in the earlier podcast. And so when this happened again, and he called and gave me that information, I was speechless. And all I could think of was, he's crazy. And, you know, I would not have been surprised if he had told me there'd been a car wreck. I'd have been shocked and horrified, of course, but, you know, that would have been certainly more easily processed than what he just told me. You know, it didn't make any sense to me at all. And
I guess Larry was out of town during all this, right?
yes, Larry was out of town on a run to Poplar Bluff, Missouri, as a locomotive engineer. My daughter Alicia was in Fayetteville. She had just started her sophomore year of college at the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville. So I was there alone, and I was just so shocked. I couldn't move for, I don't know how long. It couldn't have been very long, but seemed like forever. The first thing I said to him was, I don't even know where you live. And as he rattled off his address, I was fumbling in a desk drawer for a pen to write it down. And as he was reading off his address, my hands were shaking so hard, you know, I couldn't write, and I couldn't process the words that he was giving me as his address. So finally, I just told him to give me his phone number, and I scrawled it down on a piece of paper, threw it down on the desk, hung up, and just stood there trembling with fear like I'd never known before. I didn't know what to do. I felt like I was watching myself from somewhere out of my body, some unknown place. My eyes were squeezed shut. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't, and I couldn't even cry. I was just so totally dumbstruck by those words that were just echoing over and over and over in my head. Shot and tied to the railroad tracks and run over by a train. I just kept thinking, this man is crazy. This man is crazy. I didn't know what to do with Larry gone and being there alone. So I did what I'd always done before when Larry was out of town and I had a problem. I called our friend and neighbor, L.A. Washam. His son, Jody, was one of the neighborhood kids that Kevin had grown up with and hung out with. Jody was in and out of my house, just like one of my kids. And it was the same way with Kevin at the Washams. We often socialized with them and vacationed together many times. When LA answered the phone, I literally couldn't speak. I just stood there holding the receiver in my hand, thinking, wondering if my vocal cords were paralyzed or something. I just couldn't make myself say the words. After a minute, I was afraid he was going to hang up on me, thinking no one was there. So I finally just blurted out, LA, I need you. I'm sure he heard the panic in my voice because it didn't take him but 2 or 3 minutes to run the pathway through the woods between our houses. He was in my kitchen asking me what was wrong. I pointed the paper on the desk and told him, I need you to call that man and get his address. And without any other questions to me, he just called the number, asked for that man's address, and wrote it down. And he turned around and looked at me as if to say, what do we do now? And I told him we had to go over there and straighten something out about Kevin. And he said, I'll go get my car. And I said, no, I was already fumbling for my car keys. And about that time, his wife came in, and she knew something was wrong immediately when she looked at both of us. And she was, her eyes literally were begging me to tell her what was going on. And I told her, I said, this man is telling some kind of crazy story about Kevin being shot, tied to the railroad tracks, and run over by a train. And Gail literally sunk to her knees in the kitchen floor. I instructed her to get up. I thought, this is the last thing I need.
Yeah.
And I instructed her to get up and call my sister and tell her to get over to my house. And L.A. and I then got in my car and started driving to the Henry home.
You'd not been there before, right?
I had never been there before. I'd never met the Henrys at all. And in fact, Ella and I, neither one were familiar with the area, and we were having a problem finding the street. And I remember when we turned the corner onto the correct street, I saw Kevin and Don's cars parked in a driveway, which told me that was Don's house. I was so extremely relieved. And I mean, it's like a wave of relief washed over me. And I said, there's their cars. They're back. Everything's okay. I told you this man was crazy.
Yeah.
And so when we drove up, I jumped out of the car and started running toward their door. And a Saline County deputy was crossing the yard quickly to intercept me. And he asked if I was Mrs. Ives. And I just assumed that Curtis had called the sheriff's office when he was looking for the boys.
Right.
And I asked him where Kevin was, and he just said, Miss Ives, let's go in the house here and talk. And so we went into the house, and the only persons there were Curtis and Marvell Henry. And that was my first question, to them, where's Kevin? And they just stood there looking at me, and I asked Deputy Talent again. I said, where's Kevin? And he said, Miss Ives, do you remember what Kevin was wearing last night? And, I don't know, my body immediately stiffened, just because I was a bit insulted by the question, because he was ignoring my question to him. So I described to him what Kevin had been wearing, which was a royal blue OP muscle shirt, some 501 Levi jeans, size 29-31s, and low quarter Nike socks and Nike tennis shoes, size 10.5.
I love it how you're just, you read this off and you don't have to look at notes.
Well, moms just, number one, we buy their clothes mostly. And I don't know, we're just so much more in tune with our kids' clothes than probably fathers are.
Yeah.
But when he asked, his next question was to Curtis, and he asked Curtis if he knew what Don had been wearing, and Curtis answered no. And, I knew it was irrational, even as the thought came into my head, but it just literally flew all over me that he didn't have a clue what Don was wearing. And again, dads often don't know those things. And, in the overall scheme of things, that was such a petty little thing compared to all of the big questions around. And so Talent told us that he couldn't say that the victims were Kevin and Don, but that he could tell us that the description of Kevin's clothing matched that of one of the victims. And, I was just, I was still just, I don't know, my brain wasn't working. I couldn't process what he was telling me. And I kept saying, but their cars are in the driveway. How could you think it was them? How could they be involved? There's their cars. And he kind of looked down at his feet, and he told me that the victims had been on foot, which was just a total shock to my whole system. I'd never considered that in a million years. And, I was dumbstruck, grasping to get a handle on all of it. I looked at Curtis for some type of confirmation that it was all a big mistake. And, it just began sinking into my head that this is a real problem, that, this isn't something I'm going to straighten out, it appears. And it was kind of like, I don't know how to describe it. It was like a shield went up. And it was like my mind and my body were just totally inaccessible to everybody else, and even to me. I was just, I don't know, it was like watching from a distance, watching somebody else. I just couldn't process it. I just absolutely could not process it.
So the whole room is quiet now.
The room is quiet. LA is standing there holding on to my hand again, like it would break. And I felt like irrational thoughts going through my head off and on. I kept thinking I need to tell him to let go of my hand. But then I thought, well, if he lets go of my hand, I'm going to shatter into a million pieces and never be able to put them back together again. And I mean, just crazy things that, logically don't really make sense. But, I just could not get my head around anything that I had learned.
You could.
And
all of this is so opposite to the life that you have lived, to everything that you've been through. Like, it's foreign.
He does a good job interviewing her.
And there's nobody's life is perfect. I don't mean to insinuate it was, but everything was really good in our life, to tell you the truth. Larry had a good job. I had a good job. We were happy. 2 great kids. One in college on the dean's list, and Kevin was not a problem. Everything was just seemed to be going so well, and all of a sudden it was like everything crumbled around me. I just, I truly, the only way I can describe it is just that, I felt like everything had just crumbled around me. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to say. I was feeling really sorry for LA. LA was so distraught. And, I wanted to comfort him, but I didn't know how to. I couldn't comfort myself, much less anybody else. And so right after that, Ella and I got in the car, went home, and one of the last things that Talent said to us was that he couldn't confirm it was Kevin and Don, that positive identification would come from the crime lab. And so LA and I left and went back to my home. And when we got there were already dozens of people there. I don't know how they all found out anything, but they didn't really know what was going on, but they were there in small groups, crying and talking.
People that you
everywhere. Knew? I didn't even see faces. My thought was it was family and friends of mine and Larry's and friends of Kevin's. And they were just all crying and talking and looking at me when I walked in for some kind of confirmation of what was going on. Because they knew something was wrong, but they didn't know what. And I just walked straight past them. We had a hallway in that house that 70 feet long, led to the back of the house, and I walked straight to the back, went in my bedroom, shut the door behind me, locked it, and sat down on the bed. And I was just sitting there, and actually I was sitting there rocking, just kind of rocking back and forth, trying to think what I needed to do. And, I didn't know what I needed to do. I didn't know anything. I knew I had to call Larry, and I wanted Larry desperately there because Larry always knew what to do. And that's all I could think was, I have to call Larry. Larry will know what to do. And then I thought, what am I going to tell him? I didn't really know any details. I couldn't even say it was Kevin for sure, although at that point in time, I pretty much knew that it was. And so I sat there just rocking and rocking. People were knocking on the door, pleading for me to unlock the door. And I just ignored him. And I remember vaguely thinking something really bizarre, like, I wish I had a rocking chair in here because, it sort of soothed me for some reason. So I sat there and just rocked, and I finally came to the conclusion that I was going to have to make the call. And so I picked up the phone and I called what the railroad called the caller. They're the ones that called the crew members for the trains when they had to go out. And I called the caller, who is in Omaha, Nebraska, by the way. And I told him, I said, I have a family emergency. I have to get hold of my husband, Larry Ives. And looking back on it now, I know they were already aware that some boys had been hit and that it was probably Larry's son. And because he patched me through, he told me that Larry had already been called to return to North Little Rock on a freight train, and that he had not left the yards yet, and he would patch me through railroad communications with the trains, which I'm sure it's been done before, but certainly we'd never done it, and I didn't even know it could be done, I guess, at the time. But he patched me through to Larry, and of course, Larry already knew something was up because that never happened before. It was very, very unusual. And he asked me what was wrong, and I'm sitting there trying to figure out what to say to him. And I told him, I said, I just need you to come home as soon as possible. He says, well, I'm called to go out. But he said, what's wrong? And I'm sure he heard the trembling in my voice. And his first thought was that it was my mother. He was elderly and in poor health, and whom he actually dearly loved. In fact, it was a joke in our family that my mother liked Larry better than any of us. And so he was immediately upset, thinking it was my mother. And I told him no, that Mom was fine. And of course, his thoughts then immediately went to Alicia, being away at college and probably a car wreck or something. And I could hear his voice trembling, thinking, oh my goodness, it's one of the kids. And Alicia was the logical one, I guess, because of her long drives back and forth between college.
And her history.
Yeah, and her history of driving, exactly. Right. So, he immediately thought of her, and I said, no, Alicia's fine. I said, just come home as soon as you can. And he didn't know it then, and I didn't know it then, but the railroad, already knowing something was wrong, had called a company van to drive Larry home immediately, rather than him try to,
take a train
and being in charge of running it.
Right.
And so then I could hear voices in the background, and I could hear him. I just could feel his panic. And he said, it's Kevin, isn't it? And I just sat there. I couldn't say anything. And he said, is he okay? Is he going to be okay? And I just I just sat there for a second, and he didn't say another word. And, but I could hear these other voices, and I found out later it was his fellow crewmen and workers, and they had gotten him and put him on what they call a hot shot, which is a straight through freight that goes fast and with no stops and everything. And it would have gotten him there much faster than, the van could have. So they got him, literally got him, and put him on that hot shot train to come home. So I could, when I could hear all of this going on, and I could hear the panic and trembling and all of the commotion and everything, I slid from the bed into the floor, just crying uncontrollably. And really and truly, that's the first time I had cried. And I literally felt like I had just driven a stake in his heart. I just knowing how he felt, about Kevin, as we all did, of course. But it was like I had done it. I had driven a stake in his heart. And so after a while, my crying was, I don't know how long it went on, forever. It seemed like, I'm sure it wasn't that long. And then I got really, really angry. I was sitting there thinking, how our seemingly perfect life had just turned into ashes, in front of our eyes, because Curtis Henry had done something so stupid and used such bad judgment, and I, right or wrong, and that was the way I felt. And I don't know. I don't know. I've been very, very angry over many things about the case since then. But if I were guessing, I would say that's the maddest I've ever been in my entire life. I literally, not trying to be harsh here, but I felt like he'd gotten my son killed. And it was something, that Larry and I would have never in a million years done, would be to let Kevin Ives go out hunting and spotlighting deer out of season. We wouldn't have let Kevin do it, much less somebody else's child do it. And I was white hot with anger. And then the thought occurred to me that, I wasn't totally blameless in all of this. I should have never let Kevin spend the night that set time with the Henrys after the fiasco the weekend before. And that hurt. That really hurt.
I bet.
So I sat there for a while trying to compose.
You're still in your room.
I'm still in my room, sitting in the floor, trying to compose myself a little bit. And people were steadily knocking on the door and pleading, with me to open it. And I heard talk of trying to get something and Jimmy the door open, and I don't know what all. So, I thought, well, I need to go out there and tell him what. Out, went into the kitchen and sat at the kitchen table with everybody, as many that were around the table. And we talked, and I told him what little bit I had learned in LA. Of course, it filled him in too. And everybody was crying. There had been food and coffee and sodas and I don't know what all, ice and everything. This seemed to appear magically. So for some reason, I decided I needed to be Miss Hostess with the mostest. I was offering everybody coffee.
What else would you do?
Seeing what, if everybody had anything that they wanted or needed. And all the while I'm sitting there thinking to myself, Linda, this is unnatural. How on earth could you be worrying about refreshments for people under these circumstances? And, I just kept having all of these random weird thoughts, from the very beginning, actually, that, would go through my mind. And it just seemed so bizarre. But we sat around and talked for a good while, and finally, LA and Don Lucy and several others who were real close to us began telling me I was going to have to call Alicia. And I said, oh, no, I'm absolutely not going to call Alicia and tell her over the phone. I said, that isn't happening. And so they left me alone for just a little bit. And I think I saw them huddled over there discussing things. And, I think I mentioned something about nobody else is going to call her either. And, so I told him, I said, when Larry gets home, he and I will drive to Fayetteville and get Alicia and tell her. And so they sat there a little while longer, and LA especially, and Don kept saying, Linda, you're going to have to call Alicia. Her friends had siblings here that were friends with Kevin, and the people in Fayetteville that were friends with Alicia were calling home and asking what was going on with Kevin. And they were all very afraid that Alicia was going to hear it from someone besides me.
Right.
So, I listened to him and listened to him, and I thought, I just can't do this again. I just can't do it again after the way Larry was. And but I finally realized, continued to get phone calls and inquiries and people coming out of the woodwork, and it was really, quite frankly, it was pretty chaotic at the house. And I, the more I thought about it, the more I began to worry about, where Alicia might hear something. And so I decided, I was going to have to call Alicia. And LA, my friend, who gets invited to all of my crises, told me, he said, Linda, he said, we've called the airport in Fayetteville, which is a tiny little airport. And he said, we've got a ticket in Alicia's name at the counter. And he said, call Alicia and have somebody get her to the airport, and we'll get her home, and then we'll deal with it. And so I decided that was probably going to have to be what happened. And so I back to my bedroom, phone, shut the door, and I called the house. She had 2 roommates, and Alicia answered the phone. And I was hoping against hope she was not alone. And she answered the phone, and I said, where's Lisa? And she said, she's out and about. Why? I said, well, I just wondered, where's Jimmy Lou, which was her other roommate? And she said, I don't know, why all the big concern where everybody is. And I said, well, Alicia, here's the thing. We need you to come home. And we've got an airline ticket waiting for you. And, I need you to just grab a bag of underwear or clothes or whatever. She had a little bit of time before the flight left. And I said, grab some stuff and, come on home. And of course, she immediately thought my mother, and something was wrong with her. And I said, no, Nanny's fine. I said, we just need you to come home. Just, get somebody to take you to the airport and, come on home. Somebody be there to pick you up. And she knew then immediately. Of course, my voice then was cracking and wavering, and I'm sure she heard the panic too. And she kept saying, Mother, I'm not going anywhere until you tell me what's going on. And so I just said, I think I said, something has happened to Kevin. And she threw down the phone and just began screaming and screaming and screaming. And of course, I began sobbing. And it seemed like it went on forever. I don't know how long it was. Probably not all that long. But somebody picked up the phone and said, hello, what's wrong with Alicia? And I told him, I said, this is her mother. I said, we need her to come home. We've got a family emergency. I said, can you help her get to the airport? I said, there's a ticket waiting for her. I said, please help her get to the airport. And they did. And so with that, Alicia was home. That's not a very long flight. It's probably, I don't know, maybe 45 minutes to an hour. I'm not sure. I've never flown it. And time meant nothing at that point. And but she was home before Larry was, for sure. And she had been so hysterical, when I talked to her the last moment. I was just so in dread of her coming in and having to tell her anything. And I just thought, oh, Jesus, please, help me tell her in a way that just doesn't destroy her. I mean, how do you tell things like that in a way that doesn't totally destroy somebody?
Sorry.
And so somebody went and picked her up. Some of our friends went and picked her up at the airport. And when she got home, she was just like chilled out, not crying, not hysterical. They had already told her about Kevin because she was wanting to know what was that.
And she already knew something.
And she knew something was wrong with Kevin. And, she surmised a car wreck, I'm sure. And so I don't think they gave her a lot of detail, but told her something had happened to Kevin. And we were trying to figure out what. We didn't really know details. So then it began a wait for Larry to come home. And, everything everybody told me all day long, they were telling me I needed to do this, I needed to do that, I needed to do this. And I was resistant to anything they suggested. I kept saying, when Larry gets here, we'll figure it out.
Right.
Larry will know what to do. And, because Larry always knew what to do. And he's always been, I don't know what to even use as a word to describe it. He takes care of me. He does everything that needs to be done for me. It's a joke, as a matter of fact, in the family. I've never gone and gotten licensed. I've never gone and, assessed. I've never gone and done anything because Larry does everything. And, my whole mindset, I'd been with Larry since I was 15 years old. We got married when I was 17. And, I went from my daddy, who did everything for me, to Larry, who did everything for me.
Right. You had a real special relationship
exactly.
with your father.
Oh, absolutely. My daddy was, he
hung the moon.
He was my life. He hung the moon until Larry came along, and Daddy was a little bit jealous, for sure. Time for that train to come into North Little Rock. Larry's brothers and some of our friends drove over there to pick him up at the yards where the train had come in and brought him home. And of course, I immediately, I was standing out in the garage and in the driveway pacing, waiting for them to arrive home with him. I couldn't wait for him to get there. And when they got him out of the car, two of them on each side of him were supporting him and literally, I won't say carrying, but helping him walk. It was like he was halfway just being carried into the house. And I remember just being devastated, if that's the right word, shocked. I didn't know what. I just expected him to walk in and take over. And if anything, he was in worse shape than I was, And of course, it was all new to him. He was hearing everything for the first time. I'd had several hours to ponder everything and try to process everything. And, he was devastated. He was just devastated. And I thought, what am I going to do now? What am I going to do now? And, that was just totally shocking and, scary. Actually, it was scary to me. because I thought if Larry doesn't know what to do, what on earth are we going to do? And
He was your rock.
he was my rock. He always has been. He still is, thankfully.
Great man.
And yes, he is no better. He we told him what little bit we knew. His brothers had kind of filled him in a little bit, and I told him about going over to the Henry's house, and the last thing we'd been told by Saline County Sheriff's Office was that they couldn't make a positive identification, that it would come from the crime lab, that they were with us very late into the night. And then we tried to lay down and get some rest. We waited up for hours and hours until the very early morning hours, waiting on the crime lab to call, thinking that they would call anytime and let us know. And we never got the call that night. And finally, we laid down for a little while. And I remember, of course, I was crying. Larry was crying. He got up and paced around the room. Probably would not be happy with me sharing this, but he was wringing his hands and pacing around the room and kept saying, "I need help. I need help." And, I was saying, "What kind of help do you need, Larry?" And he said, "I don't know." He said, "I don't know." And I said, "Do you want me to call somebody?" And, it was just like, "I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what to do. I don't know what I need. I need some help." And I said, "Do you want me to call the preacher? Do you want me to call, who?" I said, "Do you want me to take you to the hospital? What do I do?" And he finally settled down a little bit. Well, actually, not in a little bit, in a great while. And morning rolled around, and neither one of us had had any sleep, and we were still trying to figure out, when were they going to call, when we were going to find out something, when did we, what was our next step to do. And the next morning, I remember Chuck Talent, deputy from Saline County,
that name,
calling me on the phone.
A lot of names.
And he said, "Where do you want the body taken?"
Wow.
And I was just totally blown away. My first words to him were, "That body has a name. His name is Kevin."
That's right. This is the conclusion of the second installment of the 2019 Boys on the Tracks interview podcast. I'm sitting here with Linda Ives. I've gotten to know her and her family, and I can't even sit through this interview without getting broken up. To think of a man like Larry, to have his strength, his persona, level-headed and strength, and to think of him, to think of the devastation. And on a side note, during that night was when there was a train used for a marker, correct?
Absolutely. When the accident, as they were calling it, at first happened, there was another train that came through right after the boys were struck. They had not even made note of nor collected any evidence before they let that second train roll through
On purpose.
And then Chuck Talent, whom I'm sure you will hear more about later, he's one of my main targets of anger, is a nice way to put it. Unfortunately, he's dead. But, and I know you don't speak ill of the dead, but I have a lot to say about Chuck Talent. But he was the one in charge of collecting the evidence at that time, and he used the back end of the train that struck the boys as a reference point for a diagram of where items around the scene were strewn, so that when that train moved They had absolutely nothing, no markers of any kind to assess where things were located. They actually used that case and incident in the law enforcement training academy on what not to do while investigating a crime scene.
So to give some context, like the investigation is going on that night while you and Larry are going through all of this, right? And into the markers, the trains and everything.
They were already gone, Simbo. They weren't out. They were gone by daylight.
Really?
From the area. They made one sweep down the tracks.
Remember, they lied
and picked
said
up
the tarp was an optical
boys'
illusion. It
clothing,
didn't
the
exist.
other various things on the scene, some cigarette butts, some I don't know, various items. They made one sweep, 3 or 4 of them across the double tracks, picking up things and dropping them in a bag, and they were gone by daylight.
And they left something behind, didn't they?
They left Kevin's foot behind in plain sight, which I will never, ever get over or forgive.
As you shouldn't.
Whoever is responsible. And they called Curtis and told Curtis. Curtis called Saline County Sheriff's Office, and they went out and picked it up and took it to the funeral home, was all I knew. And that's all that was in the official report of the incident. And of course, my first question was, whose foot was it? You know, I wanted to know whose foot it was. And
when did you find out about that?
Oh, it was much later.
Was it?
It was later.
Okay.
Not right away.
And I'm not trying to get us too far ahead here.
No,
I'm just trying to understand a little better myself.
I know it's easy to get ahead in things. One thing leads to another. It's hard for me to stay on track. But the way I found out whose foot it was is I called the funeral home that we were using for Kevin, and I asked Doug Hawkins, the funeral director. I said, Doug, did Saline County Sheriff's Office bring you a foot? And he said, yes, they did, Linda. And so that's how I knew it was Kevin's foot.
Wow. So this concludes this podcast, and we want to thank everybody for joining and listening. The hope is that the commission grows to the point where we can surround this case with professionals and overwhelm this case with professionals. And we think that the only way that we can really get the truth out there is by utilizing we the people. Linda, I want the commission to be full of people that are concerned with justice in America. People that want to see this come to an end. Thank you.
Thank you, Simbo. Well,
now I've heard the very first 3 interviews ever. Let me shut this down real quick. Turn this off.
Power on.
I'm sick at my stomach. Are y'all? I mean, I'm assuming everybody's just sick at their stomach listening to that. I mean, it makes me physically ill. So grateful. On the one hand, very grateful, beyond grateful to have, and I'm sure you guys are grateful. Bad guys aren't, but to have Linda Ives in her own words and her story. But yeah, it does pit too. Just makes you with the pit in your stomach, literally, no words. Yeah, I don't know. Pit, had you ever heard this interview? Not many people had. It was. I mean, these interviews were like 5. I don't even know if y'all had heard my first interview with Linda that I played last week out of order because we listened to 1, 2, and then 3 was last week, but it was not that one. Yeah, most people haven't because it was brand new. The commission was brand new. Everything was brand new. So obviously we didn't have a following. I mean, we had to create the following, and by the time we started getting a real following, we were in podcast, we were deep in like number 12, 13 when we really started getting, and then, you know, we went on to do almost 80 podcasts before Amy Jo and I split. I have 60 something here, because this opened up Pandora's box to people who their family member just got murdered or had been murdered and it's being covered up. Like we had no clue. I had no clue what this was gonna, and so we got off of Boys on the Tracks. We never stopped it. We never quit reporting on it, but we just kind of went with it because, and when Amy Jo and I, because it was after these two interviews and the interview you heard last week of my interview and with Linda, that Gene Duffy blew everything up, and then I was doing everything I could to salvage it. And Amy Jo got Amy Jo in on it, and we started running with it. And we hadn't even, I don't even think we got in the first podcast. We already had one of the guys that worked the case with not my father-in-law then, but became my father-in-law later, Bob Govar. Love it. He was on the drug task force, and he reached out to me because we have been doing a lot of social media. So he found it, reached out to me. And then, I mean, I had already gone down, and the week or so after I interviewed Linda, the one you heard last week, and was interviewing witnesses in person, that's when I was being followed around the hotel, being followed in my car. My brakes got sliced. I don't know. I know I had talked about this previously off and on in podcasts where I've had everything done to me you could possibly imagine. But that's when all that happened. I was staying at La Quinta, North Little Rock. That's when I got the name Terry Wayne Miller, who's a huge drug dealer. He was at the wagon wheel that night and at the tracks. He literally got the stuff from the drops. Not the only one, but he had two, Grant, and he was over Grant and Saline County back then. And then you hear the name Paul Criswell, where he was one of them that would get him straight from the drug drops. You know, they distribute it, and Paul Criswell was at the wagon wheel that night. Had it out with Paul Criswell, trying to give me hell. That didn't work. She was an idiot. She is an idiot if she's still with him. He just got arrested last, like a week ago. I got somebody that sent me the stuff on it. But everything, there's so many people involved, it's not even funny. And everything ties in together. And this, do you remember me talking about it, Pitt? Okay. I mean, midnight. Yeah, you remember talking about, and I've got my grand jury witness. This is another thing that I knew Doc Washburn was bad, because we had a huge grand jury witness, one that even Linda Ives didn't know about. And this was a girl, Ron. Okay. And we're going to play that one. It's like a 2.5-hour interview. It is beyond compelling, beyond just incredible what you hear this girl was put through. And Kirkley and Jay Campbell tried to kill her. And by the grace of God, she was able to get herself out of that big, huge crack she was in. But she was great. And she's got her own story about Paul Criswell. Okay. Yeah, you remember. So what I'm going to do is, I think I was reading part, and I'm not going to stay on here much longer, but I'm going to reread a little bit of what I read last week or weekend, and then read a little bit more on this article. Again, not all of it's true. Of course, I'll point out what's true or not. But what I was going to say about Doc Washburn, like, he went and interviewed, then he had a big interview for the anniversary of the Boys on the Tracks, and he interviewed Charlene Wilson, knowing she's lying through her teeth that she was there, but she puts it all off on Dan Harmon, and it was about everything but the case. Like, he did, and he went and interviewed her in person in her home, and I'll never forget, because I was just going off like crazy on Facebook saying, what she's talking about, where she was mistreated by deputies and she peed her pants and all that, like, stuff. Like, why would he even let her go there in the interview? And why would he not want our grand jury witness, our real truthful, solid one? No, Doc Washburn's been in on the cover up this whole time. That's why he's controlled opposition. He was in on the cover up of Linda Collins' murder. That's when we figured out he was bad. I know you guys that have been with me a long time remember that. But let me start where the first sign of a silent witness. My glasses on. Hold on just a second. Not that I can see much better with these. But where's Lynn, Pitt? Where's Lenny Joe? I tagged her and everything. I hope she's feeling okay. I haven't talked to her in a few days, but anyway. The first sign of a silent witness. And again, I read part of this the other night, but it's a little refresher till we get to what I haven't read. But as it turns out, many people who knew information about the murder of Kevin and Dawn were killed over the years, which we ain't even scratched the surface, y'all. We got a long ways to go. Most of these cases went cold. Now, what I say about unsolved murders in Arkansas, there's no such thing. If there's an unsolved murder in the state of Arkansas, it's because they don't want it solved. Okay? These were all solvable from second one, especially Kevin Ives and Dawn Henry. Many people in information about the murder of Kevin and Dawn were killed over the years. Most of these cases went cold except for one, a man named Keith McCaskill. He's the one who ran the Wagon Wheel Bar. He was the manager there. And he was stabbed 113 times. He was killed roughly a year and a couple months after the boys were murdered. And that's the one where and I'll show it to you again in a minute, where the bloody crime scene is just, oh my God, it's absolutely horrific. Well, they don't work them like they're supposed to, Pitt, because they're cover-ups. I mean, that's, I mean, I know you know that, but yeah, she says because they don't work them like they're supposed to. No, they don't work them like they're supposed to. Just like Steve Faison, Stacey Renan's daddy. I mean, they're cover-ups and the police are in on them from the get-go. I mean, you've got Kirkland and Jay Campbell, who were deputies back then. They were the ones who physically killed those boys. So yeah, they're not working them like they're supposed to. The ruling that he was murdered by his neighbor, hold on. Most of the cases went cold except for a man named Keith McCaskill. The ruling was that he was murdered by his neighbor, even though there was literally no evidence to support that. That's the one that went to prison and then got out. It's so sad, yeah. And this was Keith McCaskill. This is what he looked like. So I'm going to put some faces to the big guy. Big guy. And sorry, that was my dog. He's over there hacking. I mean, he was like 6'5", weighed like 300 something pounds, and they were trying to put it off on a little squirrely neighbor who was the size of a French fry and also like on the spectrum. But anyway, Kirkland J. Campbell killed Keith. There was another guy with him that night, and I wonder if it was Terry Wayne Miller. I'm not sure, but he's the one that as the third guy that I've often wondered if that was him. Unfortunately for the perpetrators, Keith told his friends and family that he knew too much about the deaths of Kevin and Dawn, and they thought his days on this planet were numbered. This happened just a few days before he was killed. And he went to the FBI, he went to the police, said, Kirkland and J. Campbell are following me. Kirkland and J. Campbell are going to kill me. If I end up dead, Kirkland and J. Campbell did it. And they ignored him. In fact, Detective Richard Garrett, there's a YouTube clip where he's saying, you know, that Keith was paranoid, like a paranoid schizophrenic. He was murdered. He told y'all he's going to be murdered, but he's paranoid. Yeah, he was paranoid. Second silence witness, Keith Coney. Now, this was the kid they were on the motorcycle with that they met while they were on foot and said they were going to go spotlight deer. They went to the end of the road and got on Keith's motorcycle, and they all rode to the wagon wheel, which was where Keith McCaskill, that we were just talking about, was the manager, and that's where Keith Coney would always get his pot. And they walked in, and Keith always went in the back. And wrong place, wrong time. Keith Coney was the second silence witness, and actually he was silenced before Keith McCaskill. And whatever information he knew, someone was willing to kill him for. Well, yeah, he sat there and watched Kirkland J. Campbell pull up and go to beating on the boys, and he got away on his motorcycle. Betty Alexander, Keith's mom, told interviewers that she was aware of the fact that her son was afraid for his life. A couple months before, he said a couple of times that he knew he was being watched and that he was afraid. She told the interviewer. Officials involved in the case refused to connect the deaths of Keith Coney and Keith McCaskill to the Kevin and Dawn murder. Of course they did, claiming that both Keiths clearly suffered from a lot of paranoia. A new detective on the case. In 1993, the Ives family pushed for Kevin and Dawn's murder case to be reopened. There was a detective news from his superiors not to do too much digging, especially concerning the Kevin and Dawn case. The strange instructions did the opposite of what they were intended to do, and instead of scaring off the new detective, they motivated him to do a little digging. The first thing he found is that crucial evidence had been removed from the case file. There were no photos of the scene of the crime, list of evidence, or sketches of the crime scene. He managed to make contact with a woman named Charlene Wilson. He says she told a horror story that I didn't really believe at the time, so I started searching for evidence to substantiate what she said. This is when they were trying to frame specifically Richard Garrett, Dan Harmon, and Keith McCaskill, who was already dead, for the murders. And took Linda in that direction and everyone else on purpose. As it turns out, Charlene Wilson had admitted to Detective John Brown that she was waiting at the drug drop site that fateful night, along with Keith McCaskill, Dan Harmon, and someone named Larry Rochelle. She also said that she saw Dawn and Kevin that night saying, quote, they were watching the drop sites and they got curious as to what was being dropped there. And this is her. I mean, that's her in front of a prison being interviewed. Okay, this is who we're, and that's who Doc Washburn chose to interview on the anniversary of the boys' murders. This line, and we'd already proved she lied. And he wanted nothing to do with anything we did on the case. Why? Why? Unless you're in on the cover-up. Dan Harmon was obviously incredibly angry about the confession of Charlene Wilson and started to aggressively send death threats to John Brown. But the detective stuck to his guns on this case, speaking to more people, including pilots at the Mena airport, asking if they knew about any suspicious cargo on flights. John Brown forced into early retirement. Now, eventually, he got put in prison. He was framed for child pornography. True story. And he died in prison. Well, I know exactly what they quit. And this may say something about, I don't know, but I mean, because people reached out, I want to say, if I remember correct, he had a heart condition and they quit giving him his medicines. And he had a heart, they killed him. Just like Gene Duffy John Brown got scared about what would happen. Gene Duffy, that's a lie. That's a lie. Got scared about what would happen to him if he kept working on this case. John was a good one. He really was scared. Gene Duffy was in on everything. She was at the wagon wheel that night. She was ordered down to the tracks with everybody else. She is the big fat liar. Instead, he decided early retirement was the best option. Dan Harmon had been successful in driving both Gene Duffy and John Brown out of state. Stop it. Stop it. He then appointed his friend Roger Walls as head of the task force. Although Dan Harmon seemed to remain in control for a little while, his criminal dealings caught up to him after a while. Both he and his friend Roger Walls were convicted of felonies such as drug charges and racketeering in the late 90s. Investigators didn't connect the drug charges with the murders of Kevin and Dawn because they weren't allowed to investigate anything that happened in the 80s. A surprising eyewitness account. Tom Niehaus. This is the one I said in the last podcast. He lied. He was, because just as Linda would get closer to the truth, they throw in, they paid this kid and gave him supposed witness protection to make up a story that she would believe. And she actually believed Thomas's part, at least part of the story, till the day she died. It ever makes sense. You could never put it together. So you had to realize, okay, there's lies in here. Who's the one's lying and why? What's the motivation behind it? And again, I had his aunt message me. I still got the messages. Thomas Niehaus' aunt saying, I want you to know anything. And I said, well, then he was paid by then. Thomas lied. A friend of Dawn and Kevin. I don't even believe he was a friend. I don't even think he knew him. If I remember correctly, the aunt said he didn't even know who they were. But he said he was a friend of Dawn and Kevin. I've been in the forest that night too. He kept his distance, noticing Dan Harmon. See, he's implicating Dan Harmon. Dan Harmon. Trying to make it look like all along it was Dan Harmon and his cronies. Not true. Noticing Dan Harmon and his group of cronies too. He knew for certain that it was Dan Harmon because the man was dating his mother at the time. Tom saw Dawn and Kevin. He also witnessed Dan Harmon motioning to them to come closer. This was the big lie they put out. They were hesitant, but finally they walked towards him. A while later, Tom heard a gunshot and a sudden flash. Well, he said that because there was the gunshot. Remember last podcast that there was one state police officer early on that was called because there was a gunshot heard, and one of the neighbors called. Well, that was the gunshot that killed Kevin with his own rifle. Okay, we talked about this in the last podcast where Kirk Lane. To be honest, I don't remember. I know for sure, but can't remember off the top of my head whether Kirk Lane's the one who took on Kevin or it was Jay Campbell and vice versa. Like Kirk Lane took on Don Henry, whatever. Kirk Lane and Jay Campbell made sure Kevin was shot with his own rifle. That was the gunshot heard that night. The state police initially came out, but there was nothing to, because remember, after they killed him, they'd take him back to the wagon wheel. Then Bill Clinton orders everybody to track. So there's like a few hours there after that gunshot, which was the one that killed Kevin, and they stabbed Dawn. But there was a few hours there before anyone knew anything had happened to the boys. So anyway, he says a while later, Tom heard a gunshot and a sudden flash. He then ran away in fear. All this and more was given as testimony to the police, but this testimony and Wilson's confession letter were kept under wraps for years because of Dan Harmon's foul play. Now, what it was they were doing everything they could to publicly make it look like Dan Harmon was the ringleader and all this, but privately, they were doing everything they could to protect him. If they were forced to, then Dan Harmon was going to be the guy, but that was too risky. And plus, Dan Harmon was smart, and he would set his enemies up, and like with videos, like he did with the U.S. Attorney Chuck Banks, and with him with a prostitute, like he would do things to always ensure that he was not going to go down for this. So while he was a horrible person, yeah, he was there that night, He was one of the packed drug mules, Dan Harmon user. Okay. He's not the big time drug dealer they tried to make him out to be. He was very undisciplined, and that's an understatement. And he was married to the woman. I'm sorry. Terry Wayne Miller, the guy I talked about, was married to a Julie Miller who was Dan Harmon's paralegal. Okay. And the house that Terry Wayne Miller lived in at the time with his wife, Julie, was being rented from Gene Duffy. And Terry Wayne was the biggest drug dealer in 2 counties. A final attempt at justice. Linda Ives, Kevin's mother, had a friend in the police department who uncovered Wilson's letter years later. He was retiring, so he just decided, with nothing to lose, and with Dan Harmon in jail, because Dan Harmon went to jail for a few years over some drug charges, he would hand the letter to the Saline County prosecutor, Ken Cassidy. The prosecutor was not interested in even reading the letter and said he should take it to the Saline County Sheriff instead. Unfortunately, Dan Harmon had connections all over the law enforcement department. As it turns out, his nephew, Rodney Wright, was the Saline County Sheriff at the time. Breaking news. His freaking nephew is the sheriff of Saline County right now. Rodney Wright. And he has a twin brother who's like the head of the fire department over there. So when the liar wrestler Billy Jack Haynes came along and said, I killed the boys, Bill Clinton, that was all a lie because Linda Ives was getting close again. And that all happened when she filed that FOIA lawsuit against the Clintons, the CIA, the FBI, Bob Govar, my father-in-law. Wasn't my father-in-law at the time this was filed. And was a few years before I got involved in all this and interviewed her and all that happened. So when I say this is a God thing that I'm involved in this, like there between stuff I explained that I ain't even explained, but the stuff I explained last podcast, and then like now you kind of see I kind of have a stake in this. Like Bob Govar, I knew what it felt like to have the full weight of the Clinton machine come down on you. And that's when me and his son split, and he tried to take my daughter from me. I won my daughter, but right after I had a nervous breakdown, I ended up in Rivendell in Saline County of all places. Let's see. The whole true story. I'm just going to read a few more of this and then we'll call it quits. I get sick reading this stuff because it's lies. So let's put the pieces together, shall we? Dawn and Kevin decide to get spotlighting in the woods. They're walking around near the train tracks at the back of Dawn's house. Haskell hadn't arrived yet. This is all lies. Tom Niehaus was watching from a distance. He just happened to be out there just sitting in the woods watching for what? As the 2 boys apprehensively approached Dan after being signaled to come closer. A gunshot went off. We don't know whether this was from Dan's crew or the boys' shotgun, but nobody was hurt in the first scuffle. This is lies. The escape from the woods. The boys actually escaped the woods and took off running. No. They managed to make it to a nearby grocery store. See, this is how they incorporate the payphone thing, where they met up with their friend Keith Coney. How did Keith Coney know to be at the grocery? This is where the payphone was. See, none of this makes sense. Everything I've told y'all that happened makes total sense and puts to bed for once and for all the lies in this case. Met up with their friend Keith Coney, who was later killed for his knowledge of what happened that night. 2 eyewitnesses from the store told police that Keith Coney took off on his motorcycle when 2 police officers arrived. This is the only truth to this. Officers Jay Campbell and Kirk Lane beat the 2 boys, until they were unconscious outside the grocery store. That is true. And that's actually the truth about the two that killed him, Kirkland and Jay Campbell, saying the exact same thing I'm saying. We also have a lawsuit where they sued a Hollywood producer for calling Campbell and Lane the alleged murderers. And the federal judge in California said this producer can absolutely call you the alleged murderers. Why weren't y'all investigated? And this was a case where Linda made sure she was there, and also Bob Govar testified on behalf of Campbell. What a good, upstanding citizen he was. Payphone was in the corner of the tracks. It is, yeah. And I've got all the pictures. Yeah, it was on the corner right there. It was the Ranchette grocery store on Shobe Road. Shobe, and I can't remember the other one. And then right across the highway, crossing the bridge, take a right, and then on the very left was the wagon wheel. I mean, they beat him. Officer Jay Campbell and Kirk Lane beat the two boys until they were unconscious outside the grocery store. Back to the woods, the boys were then tossed in the back of the police van. It was a police car, and taken back to the woods. It was then that they were placed on the train tracks. No, it's not when they were placed on the train tracks. And covered with a green tarp for the 6,000-ton cargo train to run them over. No, they drove him back to the wagon wheel with them in the back seat, told Bill Clinton it was done. And now what? And Bill Clinton orders everyone down there. Roger Clinton, his brother, was there. Like I said, I can't say for certain, but I'm pretty sure Billy Bob Thornton, the actor, because it wasn't long after that he got his hit movie in Hollywood, Sling Blade, because he was from Malvern. And I've been told he was the biggest drug dealer in, was that Hot Spring County. And back then, and he was best friends with Roger Clinton. Him and Billy Bob both moved, and Bill Clinton made that happen. Billy Bob Thornton has Bill Clinton to thank for that, for his career. Get him the hell out. It's unclear whether the two boys were beaten unconscious or beaten to death, but judging from the thickened blood, I've told y'all they were murdered already. Blood reported by the first responders likely that they died a while before the train arrived, because they did. This probably happened when they were placed on the tracks. Officers could have needed to make sure the boys wouldn't move. It was then that they were more than likely stabbed and had their heads smashed. No, they were beat unconscious at the grocery store at the payphone, then driven to that dead end road right there on the other side of or on up the road from where the tracks were, where they were found. And that's when, like I said, Kirkland and Jay Campbell couldn't use their guns issued by the state, by the county. So they used Kevin's rifle. The blow for Don Henry was the kidney in the back. And his shirt was covered in blood. That's why he was found shirtless at the scene. Linda Ives, Kevin, the toxic political landscape in Arkansas. Linda Ives, Kevin's mom, told interviewers, quote, "Our lives revolved around the ball field and going to the lake until the Arkansas political machine reached into our lives and destroyed the tranquility that we had." Over 3 decades since the tragic killings of Kevin Ives and Don Henry, a former pro wrestler by the name of Billy Jack Haynes has stepped forward, affirming a video that he personally witnessed their demise. That happened after she filed the FOIA lawsuit. They had to throw another monkey wrench in there. And he went, and you can tell it's all set up, because Rodney Wright, Dan Harmon's nephew, wouldn't arrest Billy. He went in to the station and confessed to murdering these boys, and at the behest of Bill Clinton, and they didn't arrest him. They told him to go on. Well, I guess I would confess. I could confess to murder too if I knew they on the front end that it was all facade and they weren't going to arrest me for it because that was part of the deal. Like actors, it's all just. I mean, the whole thing. It's so stupid. Yeah, here we are. A former pro wrestler by the name of Billy Jack Haynes has stepped forward, affirming in a video that he personally witnessed their demise. Haynes boldly asserted that these young individuals were murdered by individuals who are working for the same criminal politician. I'm going to stop there. Let me make a note of where we are in the story. And y'all be interested to know, let me just tell you. Hold on. Billy Jack Haynes, this is right after all that's when we came along, the United States Patriot Commission. And let me tell you, he and Linda's private investigator, Keith Rounsavall, who just recently was the one pushing this on to Linda. Keith Rounsavall was along, and then I get involved, and oh my God, I wish I still had the voice messages Billy Jack Haynes left on Sambo's recording, threatening to kill him and all this stuff. Wow. Because we wouldn't believe Billy Jack that he murdered, that because we knew he was lying. He didn't murder those boys. He wasn't nowhere near there. Wasn't even in the same state when it happened. And we proved that. He was at some wrestling match. I mean, and he did too murder those boys, he said. And he was threatening to kill Sambo and all this stuff. Sambo was the one who created this. He's the one in the end we have to thank for this platform. I've kind of told you the story of how it all evolved. It's a crazy story. But yeah, that happened. I mean, he would not leave Sambo alone. And neither would Keith Rounsavall. Neither one of them ever called me, though. And they knew I was Bob Govar's daughter-in-law. They knew. And I'd had run-ins with Keith Rounsavall and another issue, totally separate from all this, years before, where he was hired to, this is a whole nother deal, where we took somebody in and the mother-in-law of her, she was in danger, and the mother-in-law of her hired none other than Keith Rounsavall, and he was stalking our resort, and he was following us and this and that. My dad ended up pulling a gun on the dude. I mean, and fast forward all these years later, I'm like, oh my God, that's the same guy. I have so much personal stories that interconnect before I ever knew I would be doing any of this, that all revolve around Bob Govar and certain players. But I'm going to stop there. I think we've gotten a good podcasting tonight. Are y'all having trouble? I'm hoping it's just her service. She says the video, Jackie said the video was lagging and broken up. Hard to watch about the last half hour. And not. Can somebody chime in? God, I hope not. I pray not. I don't know how, because I'll redo it next time. I'll redo some of this stuff. If anybody in chat, Shirley, is anybody still up? Hold on. This is lagging a little. Me trying to scroll through chat for some reason. Midnight, so glad you're back. Thank you, Midnight. Hey, it is lagging, Shirley says. Were y'all able to get the gist of everything. Y'all's have been messing up. Dadgummit. Now I'm gonna have to watch it. I'll start it tonight I'll probably just watch the whole thing before I go to sleep tonight to see the next podcast where I need to because I'm talking about this case. So they mess, y'all know they mess. You're here, Shirley. Okay. Did y'all miss anything? It was lagging, but did y'all miss? It says hood not. Oh, good night, girl. I think that's what she was trying to say. You am. She says I am. I was. Shirley said you were having issues. Okay. Here, I think it's because I'm talking about this case and I'm talking about Kirk Lane and Jay Campbell and Bill Clinton and Roger Clinton and all that. Okay, she said yes, it was lagging, but she understood it. So I'm assuming that means you could still understand. It just was acting up. As long as the content's there and you were able to get the content, real bad lag tonight. Maybe on the replay it won't be like that. Cutting out on her some. That's what happens, especially for anybody that's new watching. This is not people used to be like, oh, what, another podcast or two deep. No, it must not have been just your internet. But Midnight says it was lagging for her too, but she understood it. So I'm praying to God you guys could at least hear everything. Nothing was cut out, that kind of stuff. But I guess I'll find out. You think it'll be okay, Midnight? Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's annoying, lagging and any kind, but my biggest thing is the content there and enough to understand it, then I'm okay with it. It's when it like cuts out like and skips over 5 minutes of me talking or something. That's when it becomes a problem. It's done that for y'all. Be sure and hit the like button if you would on this video and comment on not just the live chat, but when the video, I'm going to end it in a second. And then please leave a comment on the video. It helps in the algorithms. I'm going to hang up real quick. My website, jojosforjustice.org. Anybody that can contribute, help me financially. I really want to be able to do this for a living and not do anything else. But we all got to make a living. And I have expenses. I just paid today $38 for the month for my website that I'm barely breaking even. I don't even think I'm breaking even on anymore. I got to build it back up, and I didn't focus on it. Yeah, it happens a lot on my channel. You understood it too. It was more freezing, but you could hear mostly. Okay. That's better than it. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, jojosforjustice.org. My Cash App, anything y'all can send, it's $sign ShellyJoGovar, ShellyJoGov as in Victor AR. PayPal's at ShellyJoGovar. And they said last week, this video is going to generate tips, more tips. Sure enough, I've had 2 people reach out. And then I'm on Facebook at ShellyJoGovar. You can message me on Messenger. And especially if you have stuff to tell me, I will guard your name with my life. I think that's it with that. I love you all. Thank you all for being here. Again, don't forget to like the video, comment in the comments, and if you can contribute financially, I really need the help. With that, I'm Shelly Jo. My daughter is my Jo. She's the reason I fight, and we're the JoJos for Justice. Good night.